Yeah. Yeah, drink if you have one. If you can share, please bring me some. I would like an alcoholic beverage. Brian, please. Thanks. All right, anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and just let the panel introduce themselves because they could probably do it better than I can. I'll start with you, Amy.
Hey, I'm Amy Manley at Weird Girl on the Twitter land, and I'm a systems engineer at University of Chicago. Been playing with automation for a few years now, so it's near and dear to my heart, and that's about it.
All right, I'm Jon Hildebrand. I'm a senior cloud engineer for a MSP in the Midwest, based out of Des Moines, Iowa, and I really like PowerShell.
Hi, I'm Luc Dekens. I was lucky to be involved with PowerCLI from day one, nearly, so to say. My love just extended to PowerShell as well, automation, all the stuff. DevOps came in the last couple of years.
I'm Kyle Ruddy. I'm the Senior Technical Marketing Engineer for VMware. I cover vSphere APIs, CLIs, including PowerCLI and SDKs.
My name's Eric Lee, at Eric B. Lee 6 on Twitter. I've been automating stuff for about 20 years. If I have to do it more than once, I'm scripting it, automating it, doing whatever. I currently work as a technical architect for one of the largest healthcare systems provider based out of Kansas City. So,
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate you guys coming to join me on this little journey. But I'm going to throw up a softball right off the bat. I spoke with Kyle a little bit and Eric a little bit about this, but PowerShell on Linux. So what are your thoughts right now on this? Because that's kind of the big thing, the latest big thing, I guess, it's popped up. Yes, and that's what I thought I was going to get for a response.
Right, cool. Right?
Anybody chime in? Luke, go ahead.
It's amazing. That's it.
Yeah,
It's a new company that was born a couple of years ago, in my opinion. They have a new path to the future. Okay, it's a commercial institution. They have some purpose behind that, but for us users, it's a big thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a tremendous thing because not only is this just being released for Linux and OS X, but it's also being open sourced. So now people from the community can actually, go out to their GitHub repo and you can make updates and do pull requests for things that you want to see. And it's also been kind of interesting so far because there's been some drama and things that have been happening that have been very interesting to see because it's very much a growing experience for Microsoft. So it's a great thing to see. It's definitely a step in the right direction, and at least as far as being a VMware employee, we were very lucky to be featured on one of their partner that so Alan Renouf was able to show off a version of PowerCLI that was working within the new PowerShell on Linux and even OS X.
me personally, I think it goes to show how much automation and scripting has grown and everybody's wanting to do it. So as these types of languages and processes and stuff are out there, they're becoming more available across operating system platforms to use because there's such a need, to get your stuff running and working across multiple platforms. So I think it just goes to show in that area that how much it's growing and everybody's doing it. So for the Mac guys, they don't have to run a Parallels box anymore to do their PowerShelling. I mean, they still do for a while until everything works, but it'll just make it more efficient for those Apple people that carry stuff all over with them. So.
Sorry about that. We had a technical difficulty. We actually don't work on AV equipment. So, yeah, there you go. I guess real quick, how many people in the audience right now are automating all the things in their environment? Okay, what kind of tool sets are y'all using currently to do this automation? Are you mainly PowerShell, PowerCLI? Mix of everything? Yeah, I know, a ton of stuff for you. Yeah. But no one wants to add in on that, huh? Okay, yeah, Orchestrator is definitely something I know you've done some work with it.
VRO, yeah.
Yeah. But so what do we actually see as kind of the biggest pain point right now with people starting to automate things in their environment? Because there's been a big uptake in it. We're trying to orchestrate all the little tasks that we've automated. So what are some of the pain points that you see people going through right now?
Well, I can honestly say people that I've talked to, most of their problems are just trying to code. Most of them may not have programming backgrounds to begin with. And even though we're trying to simplify things down to not necessarily consume, say, RESTful APIs, but provide something simpler for them to make their way towards that direction, most of the biggest problems that I see for people who aren't scripting are, I don't know the language, I don't know the language, and I don't know the language. Those are the three things I hear.
And that actually, I kind of think towards the opposite of that. I think you don't need to have much programming to be able to automate. I think that's kind of the misunderstanding is that you need to be this great programmer to automate, because I can tell you now I'm not a script machine. So with stuff like vRealize Orchestrator and all the Git flows and flow grabs, and you can download code already. There's a lot of built-in workflows, but you can also, the language is pretty easy to pick up. My background is more just infrastructure, and obviously a programmer is going to do it faster than me, but I can figure it out, and I can write a workflow and complete, my VM build end to end, something like that. So I think it's emphasized too much, and it scares people away when actually you can get your feet wet.
Are you talking to the JavaScript native, the VRL?
Sure, but you can use any link, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
One of the biggest challenges to a lot of those tool sets is learning how to work with that tool set, and all of them are a little bit different, right? When I started with vRealize Orchestrator, when it was built into Virtual Center, it was knowing where to go to find, the call and how to pass that variable from subcomponent, and how to link workflows together. And once you kind of get through that part of it, there really wasn't a lot of good instructions on how to do that originally, and now there's some very good stuff. Once you get through that part, it becomes very easy, and then you're going to build your big monstrosity workflow, and then you're going to go, oh, I want to reuse these little parts over and over again. And then you're going to deconstruct it and do it properly into subcomponents and link them together. So the hardest challenge in a lot of tool sets, whether it's Electric Commander, Blade Logic, vCenter Orchestrator, or whatever, is how to work within that tool and find out, what those calls are, what the returns are going to be, and stuff like that, and be able to continue to use them.
So what would you recommend to people on like a learning path?
Google.
Yeah, this is a great panel so far. Google.
Let me Google
Literally. Yeah. And those books are great.
Shameless
Josh
plug.
Atwell writes books.
Thank you. How much do I owe you now?
A pint.
The biggest thing is find blog posts or whatever for the tool set you're working with, but make sure if you don't have any experience with it, make sure you're finding the proper one to start with that doesn't overwhelm you. Some of them in the very first vCenter Orchestrator workbooks were like, oh, import these workflows, we'll walk you through it, but it really didn't show you how to do some of those things or how to use the API browser or some of those other things. That once you learn how to do that stuff, that's the magic where it all kind of clicks, and then you can start working through it. So the newer books have that stuff in it, which is great.
If I may remark on that one, Googling is fine, it's one of your essential tools, but what you should do is talk to other people. Yep. You shouldn't try to do it on your own. Yep. And that's where the community part comes in, which is quite important in automation, DevOps in fact. You don't come up with all these ideas yourself, you steal what you need. Because all the stuff most of it has been there already. Don't reinvent the wheel.
And if you have a question, post it on the blog, and he's probably going to answer it before you can hit.
In 10 seconds.
So, I've heard a lot of talk here about programming and learning how to program and write code. But at what point, do you have to understand the processes that you're automating and learn how to document them, or even identify what's a bad process and fix it before you do automate it?
I think that's the first step that's critical. Define your business process, your business needs, because you don't want to automate just to automate. Great, it's fun for you, but is your business?
And start simple. The biggest drawback that you have, in my experience, is try to tackle legacy systems. Try to find a nice, small new project in your environment and automate that one. That's where you learn. Do the big ones, the legacy stuff later on. You can't do that in one go. You will be attacking too many silos, too many little kingdoms you're trying to change. Don't do that.
But if you create standards, and I think breaking down the silos, it helps. You talk to the storage team, what do you want to see automated? And then they'll work with you if you're trying to solve their problem as well. So.
And a lot of what you'll see is like what we've done traditionally in infrastructure is, the CPUs get faster, and then we need more memory, and then we get more memory, and then we're pushing it off to storage. Then storage needs faster. We continually push that bottleneck around. Once you start automating large processes, you kind of do the same thing. You automated this component of it, right? Now we're going to get to this next step faster, right? So I constantly have to revisit those workflows to go, okay, now where did I push my bottleneck to as far as getting the process done to do that? So in my environment that we're in, my company, we are mandated to revisit our processes so that we're constantly making our processes better and making sure that we didn't miss anything. So we actually have checks to go back and reminders to go back and look through all of our processes, and we have to have a peer review of them. So that helps us to continually make things better.
And so what kind of timeline do you have for those?
Every 3 months for most things.
Wow.
So
That's awesome.
but you're given time to do it too. So I know in my current company, it's that way. My previous companies, it wasn't so much that way. I automated out of need, so I would have time to do the other cool things. So. But it's been very helpful for us, because our processes are all documented, the automation's all documented. Somebody has a question, they can go see it.
So then a follow-up to that last thing you said about, getting the time to review your workflows and your processes. How do you make the business case in an organization that doesn't understand the value of automation and doesn't want to dedicate the time to it? How do you show back that it's worth their while?
Well, luckily for the scale that my company is, it pretty much shows its worth by doing it, once we implement it and doing it.
But what about the company that has
Correct.
2 sysadmins and they're pulling their hair out, putting out fires, working 80 hours a week because the business doesn't care about IT, but they need to do this?
And that has always been a definite challenge to where I've been. For me, usually what happens is there's a new release of Power CLI, and I go review and what new commandlets or stuff that I can do can automate it. It's never been, it's usually for me, it's been on my own time because I want to make a process faster. I was never, quote, given that time by managers or whatever else, but I know that if I can get something else done and then I get a little bit of time to revisit this, it's going to make that process faster for the business. But it's hard for management, to see it, because those are a lot of soft costs most of the time when you're doing it. Where I'm at now, we work with the healthcare industry, right? So if I can make something faster to where a doctor can see more people, then I can visualize that. We get metrics off of that. They are like, we see that return, let's do it.
Yeah, I actually lived through that kind of hell at a company that Nick's familiar with too. We had outages every day. We eventually had all of our staff on a different outage bridge, and it was like, how are we going to automate? But you start by stabilizing your environment, finding create a heat map, tackle those problems first, get down to green, and then, okay, cherry pick, automate getting a snapshot, automate, creating a VM, just little things like that, and how you're able to sell it to the business, especially where I am currently, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow at the vBrownbag, is showing how complicated your process is. We had 5-page Visio of handoffs to different engineers just to build a server, and now it's a little Visio of just automated process, goes off, hand off. So if they can see the ROI overall, then I definitely have executive buy-in. It's actually harder at the engineer level to get the understanding. So.
All right, so we started the conversation around pain points, right? And we didn't continue. So I'm interested to continue that, down the line, and wanted to put one out there. So from what I've seen, when a project has a lot of attention, it needs to be done, by a certain deadline, right? There's a lot of hurry up and do it, but then the documentation is very lacking, or not at all. So it's like, the project deadline was to complete it, not necessarily to do it the right way. Problem is that person goes away and then it breaks and then no one can fix it, Right. So I just wanted to put that out there as a pain point, but also continue to hear, what everyone else has to say about pain points with automation.
Well, I think documentation is something that we've all kind of pressed as being extremely important. I mean, when you're trying to automate anything, documentation is key. Actually, documentation is key for everything that we do. Just for that exact example, if I walk out of here and get hit by a bus or, shot by somebody out here, well, there goes that knowledge. No ideas. Not giving you an idea.
He's
Or the
shady
okay to do it.
Yeah, and there's two parts to that. The primary problem with that you're talking about is that's a culture change, because what we've done in my previous company that I worked for, which we did software development and stuff too, is everybody who wrote stuff was in charge of documenting it. And you couldn't submit and get through the process to get your stuff deployed without your stuff being documented. So you wrote your code, you documented your code, and you had to write a test for your code. Whether it was a code, an automation workflow, or whatever it was, it had to work through it. It had to work seamlessly throughout the whole process from deployment, validation, reporting to get it done. Now that's a culture shift that you got to get through, right? And sometimes that doesn't get implemented until you get bit in the ass, and then they go, oh, well, we need to do this. Sometimes it just takes that to get it done, but you've got to start working through that and say, oh, well, if I'm documenting something, I want everybody else to do it. I need to make sure that that's out there and aware. So if I'm going to write something, if I'm going to do something, whether you're just putting notes in the script or document it somewhere else, you got to make sure that it starts with you so that everybody else learns from you as well, too.
That's a good point, but I guess what we're seeing is that it's not software development shops that are doing automation.
Yep.
Right? It's the IT. Those processes don't exist, right?
Yep.
It's your cloud admin, it's not your developer. So those processes aren't in place, or maybe they don't know what they are.
Yep.
So I think you're right. It is a culture change. But yeah, it's not the developers that are developing now, right? So it is.
But it's the same, whether you're an actual developer writing
By
funny
title.
code or you're writing scripts, you're developing a process, right, that you're doing. It all needs to be documented for everybody.
What I think here is important. We're not developers, and most of us are not. We are IT pros or whatever they call it over here. We are automating, but you should do your testing and your validation, automate that as well. So the next guy who comes in your shop, he already has these tests to start with. He knows what to look at. And that is things like Pester and so on. They are very important if you want to automate your deployment.
So a related, but a little bit different, since you use the term, IT professional, so you come from an infrastructure background, and you gave the classic example of automation, the building of a server. There's good practices that developers do, like, for example, source code management, source code control systems. I'm curious if you could comment what tools you are using for managing source code. As you're doing your work.
Git.
Whatever gets the job done.
Yeah.
What happens in the environments I saw is, most of the time, we're not developers. Those developers, they already have their source control. They have their processes to put something in production and so on. That's where this DevOps part comes in. We learn from them how they do it. And if it does our work, why not reuse those tools? It can be an ancient source control. It could be GitHub, whatever. If it does the work done, use it.
And you need to take a look at your whole entire process. So if you're in a software development shop and you're looking at doing continuous integration processes or continuous testing processes, you need to make sure whatever your tool set is that's going to help you, that you're going to utilize, can integrate with that code repository, right? So that you can do builds out of it and then inject it into your VMs or your containers or whatever you're doing. So when you're looking to go that route, a lot of them do nowadays, but you got to pay attention to see what's there and what's available to work with as well. And Git's the most common that a lot of people can work with. So.
It's interesting, you all, if they say Git, that if you're developers, if you have developers inside the shop, .NET based, when you're using Microsoft tools. It's interesting.
Yeah, so
No, there's others as well.
there's-
In some environments, I'm using ClearCase. Who remembers ClearCase? I mean, that's a source control system as well.
So at my last company, we used Subversion as our code repository. And so we used Electric Commander because we had a plugin to Subversion, so we could auto build every 12 hours from there, deploy VMs, deploy it into it, do tests, validate tests, tear everything down, and then report back to the developers every 12 hours. So we had an automated build process that nobody touched manually every 12 hours, and developers had a live stack of that code every 12 hours.
I think that is a very interesting end target, but if I come back to Sean's question, but you have 2 administrators, they're not going to get that from day one.
No,
So they should start small, build in some testing if you have a new version of your deployment. Do this automatic deployment, continuous deployment, do that later on, but you're working towards that goal. That's what you should do, write out that goal where you want to go to in the end.
And it took us years to get to that point.
Yes.
We started out with physical boxes that we would use Electric Commander to just pull code and deploy to the same box, and then we would yank the code back out of the box, and then you deploy to that same box again later and yank it back out, right? And then we built onto it, you know. Then we started using Lab Manager to auto deploy the VMs, right? And then inject it in. And then we, you know, converted to vCloud Director, you know, and stuff like that. So we started small, and then eventually we got to the point where we're deploying the OS, then deploying the application, then adding the code to it in a full stack build every single time. So we started very small, and that's what you definitely have to do.
I guess a question for everybody on the panel. Like you mentioned full stack build, which is, you know, ultimately we're trying to deploy apps and we're doing it on premises and in public cloud now. What are the mixes of tools that you guys are using, like to be able to deploy workloads to both locations? And the example I gave is like, is in Amazon, there's CloudFormation templates now, so should you use vRealize Orchestrator with the plugin for Amazon, or do you just use a CloudFormation template and pop it on the end? Like what are the, curious all the different tool sets you guys have found to solve that use case?
To be honest, I don't think we need to really discuss tool sets. You use, like I said earlier, you use what helps you. If you're going for the cloud, use that tool. If it's AWS, they have nice APIs. They have layers built on top of those APIs that you can use. I remember there's a GitHub module, for example, in PowerShell. If you need to do your auto deployment, continuous deployment, use it. It's like I said earlier, just use what is there, steal it. Don't reinvent the wheel.
I guess it's more like when workloads are scaling up and down in, say, Amazon, for example, right? Do you come back out to vRealize Orchestrator where you've built an integration with ServiceNow for your change control, or do you just have Amazon go direct to ServiceNow? Do you always do those hops back to your Orchestrator, or do you just use the tools natively? Just curious.
I would think you would use your on-premises versus off-prem would be different. You know, you wouldn't want your call to ServiceNow and then going back to the cloud. I would think, right, currently we use ServiceNow to VRO to, you know, Puppet and STCM. I would think a separate instance in the cloud, like Amazon, to handle those services would be my kind of educated guess. But we're not deploying to the cloud yet. I mean, we're looking into that, kind of a hybrid solution. So,
if you're doing that separately, aren't you recreating silos at that point?
I just mean the back and forth, at least over the WAN. I mean, I wouldn't want a CMDB information coming across. Like, that's just thinking out loud, really. Yeah.
Anyone else? You chime in a little bit? No?
So I think it depends on your use case, and I hate that it depends. Because because you have to take a look at what security risks you want to have, what networking you're going to have, what you care to transmit over, where your code repository is going to live for what you're going to do. And code repository is a loose term. Where's your images going to be? You know, what you're deploying into. It all will go into it. We probably have, 12 tools, you know, for automation. Do we use most of them? No. You know, it's just we've grabbed them over years. We've got shelfware, stuff like that. So you really, and a lot of times nowadays, everything's got an API. I think somebody said this on the last panel. Everybody has an API. Some are better than others, this or that. You really have to pick a tool set that you're getting really good with, that you're used to working with, and then go find the code that everybody else has used to do it and figure out how to do it in that tool set and get really good in that one tool set and use that. And if you have to do multiple tool sets, that's when you're going to start looking for an orchestrator on top of it to talk to your multiple different automation processes underneath.
So I'm curious, we've talked a lot about PowerShell, but irregardless of the tool, we've focused a lot on the infrastructure development, right? So how are you guys enabling your users to consume the code that you've written? Are you using a tool to do that, or are they not consuming that, and you're just automating the infrastructure, and then they use whatever server you build?
For myself, we're using a self-service portal using ServiceNow. So there's a content catalog, a service catalog to request a VM, request a snapshot, and it's all automated with some checks and balances. But we want to get to the point where we can actually build out for developers so they can build up their own servers, break them down, but still without using VRA, just using ServiceNow and VRO, because it has the same capabilities, and it's the tools we own now. So.
I can pretty much say I work in a Cisco-centric shop, so I'm probably one of the poor, unfortunate souls in here dealing with UCS Director on a day in and day out basis. So that's the primary portal capability that our customers will come in for, or we will represent an internal CMDB that will call upon particular workflows to deploy bare metal services, things like that.
It depends a bit on your scale as well. For our production applications, they are in-house written, so we have a lot of software development going on, and they have their definitions. They do that, they do their request in the CMDB, that generates actions. Some are vagrant, some are pure PowerShell scripts, whatever, to generate their development environment and their test environment later on. But it depends again, and I hate to use that word.
Yeah, it definitely gets thrown around quite a bit.
One general remark there, what we shouldn't try to do is go for one rule, one single solution that does it all. That doesn't exist in my opinion. No. Right. It's all, you mentioned it as well, he has 12, 13, 14 tools in your shop. You could go for one with which you manage all these. That would be nice. So if all these other tools have interfaces that you can manage from a top layer, that would be nice, but there will never be a single solution. That comes back to Nick's question as well. If you have cloud work to do or you are on-premise or whatever, it depends what you're going to use, but it would be nice to have one tool on top with which you can direct all those different layers.
Yeah, and I think to that point, a lot of the questions that I heard from a lot of managers is like, well, this product has an API, this product has an API, it's going to make us be able to work with it better, and we'll be able to deliver faster. And I'm like, well, no, just because it has an API doesn't mean I can in a day automatically deploy something or configure something or do something. So in your tool sets, before you buy a tool set, before you invest in it or whatever, you need to know your processes, like Amy said earlier, because each of the tool sets, like you mentioned earlier, will have workflows to already integrate with different things, right? They're already there, you know. We can import the NSX stuff into vCenter Orchestrator to automate a lot of the workflows that you might just have to tweak a little bit, whereas if you use something else, yeah, I can still automate it, but now I have to write all those workflows, right? So one product's going to get me quicker to delivery time to be able to consume it than others are. So you need to look at your processes, what you're trying to do, what you're integrating with, and this and that, if you're going to buy a tool set to do that. And that'll help you out to get quicker off the ground and do what you're doing. So.
I think we had a question. John?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of automation in terms of skill set, in terms of our whole industry, right? It's got to be part of our toolbox. It's got to be what some of the value we deliver. But, so like in our last panel with the HCI, part of the discussion there was that they determined that, well, part of the advantage was it's just a new generation of software with fewer knobs, right? And so you're actually removing some of the knobs, so removing some of that need, that last generation thing you might have automated. The next generation storage or HCI system, you don't have to automate because it does it all itself. Isn't any, in this community, we also differentiate, we have come up with the differentiation between scripting and orchestration, right? Scripting is ad hoc, it's what we do at first until we can systematize something and now we orchestrate. But isn't any automation or orchestration that you do in your shop just kind of a stopgap measure and failure of the vendor to deliver something that actually is valuable out of the box? And then as a follow-up, if if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, could your colleague pick up your orchestration and automation? Or if you went to a desert island for 6 months and you came back and all the APIs had been upgraded, could you even understand? Like, yeah. So how much are we really just? I don't know. There's a question in there somewhere.
There's 2 questions in there, I think.
It sounded like a couple of questions.
Right. I don't think any vendor could fill any one business need. I work in healthcare. We have different needs than a financial firm, so I don't know if there's going to be a magical tool. I'm sure there's a lot of vendors that tell you they can sell you a magical tool, and you just buy it. And I know a lot of people who've bought an expensive tool, and they deploy it, and then it sits there because it didn't fill their need. They just deployed the basics, and they paid for services, and now they're gone, and it's sitting there. So that's why I like to go with what's in-house and then go from there, because then you also get more buy-in. So again, a plug for vCenter Orchestrator or VRO, if you realize. It's free with vCenter. Like, why not use it instead of buying something very expensive? And I forget the second half of your question. Right? Is this stuff actually... Oh, if I leave and die or... Well, yeah, like... You comment your code, as far as, like for me, for VRO, you make a workflow that can run on its own. You don't make one that has a dependency and then it breaks. So you comment the hell out of that script and documentation. At my place, we use SharePoint and, love it or hate it, that's what we use. So I try to do little lunch and learns mentoring too, because then it sharpens your own skills too.
I was just going to mention that sharing is awfully important with the information. So I'm always in the same kind of boat, always with my peers, always trying to go over the code, the simple components, and then hopefully hand it off to them to maintain afterwards so we don't have a hit by a bus scenario.
If it's the brisket bus, it might not get there.
That part of your remark, Jon, aren't we covering the lack of what the vendors are not supplying? I don't think so, because we're all working in heterogeneous environments. I don't think they can foresee all possible combinations that can be out there. What they do need to do, and that's where the REST interface is, or whatever interface, you need to have well-defined interfaces between all your components in your infrastructure. And that's where we come in. You make those interfaces talk with each other. That's where your automation happens, in my opinion.
Okay, so I think we all agree that somewhere out in the world there's a bus with each of our names on it, and we're just waiting to meet it, because I hear that so much. If you look back over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had the same conversation over and over again about how to target automation, how to do things, the barriers to automation. Things have improved with source control. Things have improved with extensibility to where you can do more. At what point do you think we'll start actually getting an opportunity to make automation more consumable? When I look at things like if this, then that, I can literally just say click, 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 and this is just the small process that needs to happen. Being able to have a much more visual representation of performing a task in more layman's terms, where the back-end code takes care of everything that you want to do. It seems to me like this is something that we should have by now. I mean, hell, I can go to GoDaddy and build a website without knowing any HTML and make this nice-looking website, or pull in some templates, or arrange it just the way I want it to meet my objectives, and then integrate it into Salesforce with a couple of clicks. I mean, why are we not seeing that in the infrastructure automation and the data center automation space?
I think Luke just answered that, because they can't write the workflows for everything. So one company may use, net backup. One company may use, TSM, for God, whatever, different backup process. So I can't have a workflow that's already pre-built that's going to deploy a server, deploy a backup agent if they're still doing them in the operating systems for some dumb odd reason, and already get that all set up for you. So it's just hard for the vendors to write workflows that work with everything out of the box to where you can do it. That's kind of where we have to be able to do it in a manner that can be consumed and efficiently deployed like that. So.
But I think vendors are starting to recognize that, because now, we're actually going through a storage POC, and a lot. Hey, we have written workflows. I'm like, great, I don't have to write anything. So I think a lot of vendors are seeing that customers want this. We better make APIs that are usable and published, and then also they're already writing the code for you now too. So at least
you have
that's
to stick
happening.
with the vendor in that case.
Vendor lock-in.
Well, it tilts the scale in their way though. Like
I remember your question from the previous panel where you asked a question about AI, and I think that's where we should ultimately aim to, and not the AI from the Skynet type of thing, but machine learning. No, but I mean, your example, you have a backup tool. Whatever tool, it should, for example, in an ideal world, have a self-discoverable REST API. So your flow automation, your management on top should be able to ask that backup tool component, and then based on the RTO, RPO rules he has, he just sends commands over there. You don't even have to bother with that. What you do is on a much higher abstract level, you say, this is my RTO, this is my RPO. Take care of it.
Define the rules of engagement.
Yes.
And we should learn to define less in IT terms, but more in our end users and manager terms.
Well, and I think in answering my question, you highlighted a more fundamental problem that I believe is improving, is that there has been no standardization in how people deliver. Because the reality is whether you're using Veeam or TSM or whatever, there's some common core things to what Luc's saying that you're trying to answer and solve, right? It's those specific steps that may be unique, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be a common framework for including that.
Yeah, at my previous job, we had multiple business units writing different software. And so when you would deploy like the web tier or whatever, everybody was doing it a little bit differently, different return codes outside of the standard, stuff like that. We actually had to go through a standardization process so that when the app was deployed and the web tier came up, we could get monitoring return codes so we would know exactly what they are and what state that node was in. And so we had to go through and standardize it across 6 different applications and have them all added into their code. So during the automation process, we could do a check to see if it was up and alive and working properly in a quicker fashion by just doing an HTTP call instead of going in and checking internally. It was a huge undertaking, and it took 9 months to do, and it took longer to people to agree on the standards that it actually took to add it into the code, which is one of the biggest challenges is, getting the silos to agree on something, whether it's storage and network or 2 different development departments inside the same large company.
Luc, I hear what you say about the scripts are already out there, so just use them, copy on, why reinvent the wheel? But I really do want to get better at coding or programming and learning PowerShell. So I currently follow you, and I follow Kyle. So what script editors do you use? And like what I'm looking forward to tomorrow's hackathon to see some talent, some coding being done there. So what script editors do you all use? And yeah,
Sublime Text.
No, seriously, I've been doing more and more in the PowerShell ISE that comes with it. It's getting very, very powerful. If you add on top of that the paying ISE steroids will add a lot. Yeah, you have to pay for it. On the other hand, there is the VS Code at the moment, which is progressing rapidly, which is, again, a community effort established by Microsoft, and I have to admire even for that what they are doing there. This editor is using the standard Visual Studio Code. They build a PowerShell plugin on top. They're not there yet, but if I see what changes they do every 2 weeks, it's enormous. So watch that one very carefully. For the moment, I use ISE most of the time.
Yeah, I've turned over to Visual Studio Code myself just because I kind of had access to the PowerShell on Linux stuff for a little longer than most people. So that just allowed me to maintain my development on the Mac OS system that I currently run. So I didn't have to jump into a Fusion VM or anything like that. But when I am on a Windows box, I'm ISE as well. And one of the things that, since this is an automation panel, ISE steroids, if you talk to the guy who's running that site and you're a vExpert, you can actually apply for it. And there's a pretty good chance that he'll grant you a license to it. But it is one of the things where it's a one-man show essentially. So if you can afford to pay for it, definitely do pay for it. Or even if you get it and you find value in it, again, pay for it. But yeah. Anybody else? Favorites?
Same.
Ditto.
I was going to say, especially with the advent of PowerShell on Linux or PowerShell on OS X, I've been messing around more with Visual Studio Code and its integration. Although still waiting for a lot of the libraries to catch up to be able to run on Linux and OS X.
My biggest disappointment in VS Code at the moment, they can't collapse regions. I hate that. So when you have a for each structure with the curly braces, you can collapse those, so you can have a better overview of your code. But that's not a PowerShell add-on problem, that's the VS Code beneath it that has that problem. I have an issue open on GitHub for months on that, but they don't seem to touch it at the moment.
They just keep pushing it to the side.
Don't they know who you are?
I'm going to mention Cole, I think, shortly. That was my first answer. Notepad++, because they have a plugin there.
I was going to say, like, some of us, like, I came from a Linux engineering background, and I always just used whatever editor I could get my hands on. Like I use Sublime Text right now with a bunch of plugins, and I mean, it works just fine for what I need to do.
With the streaming editor, you can do a lot, of course.
True. I guess it just depends. Again, it depends.
Yeah, just different flavors.
Is there any other questions? Anyone got any other questions? That was actually a pretty good question. Tier what?
So the hacking codes to get scripts together and getting stuff, downloading it and running it and testing it to automate stuff is great. What would you guys say you need to do to get code into a sort of production ready state? So things like error handling, logging, things like that. Is there any other stuff that you would add?
It will have to pass all your tests that you defined in advance. So if you write a rather extensive script or a module, nowadays I don't think you should go into production if you don't have pester tests in there, for example. Mm-hmm. So the next one who comes and changes, you run under a bus and the next one starts changing your code, he should be able to not first read your code and decipher it, but be able to see if what he changed destroyed your code completely. That's the first test. And there's more, of course. That's just the first step. You can, in Pester you have the unit testing and the integration testing. So I was talking of the unit testing. The integration testing, that's the next part where you're going to see how your change interacts with other components in your module, but also with other modules in your environment. And then it becomes quite complex, and you will have some quite complex Pester tests, but they're worth it, in my opinion.
How complex do you find Pester to be to those people that are new to it?
Quite.
Any recommendations for getting started then?
Start simple. There are a few good online web-based courses where you can do simple stuff. For example, you write a module, just checking your manifest, for example, if you export all the functions in your module. That's 3 or 4 lines in Pester, I think. But your Pester test, you can simulate complete environments. You can write your own functions. Then it becomes very complex. But you grow or you learn as you go along. Like all this stuff, I'm afraid. And there's the community. There's a good chance that 90% of what you want to do has already been done.
And yes, for me, simple logging, just logging after everything I do, because you miss one small thing, and then I'll have a colleague look, oh, you forgot that. Just have the output written. I like to keep things, I don't get crazy functions running, but I like to keep it all simple and break it down into chunks, and then it makes it easier to manage, at least for me personally.
That's a very good idea. Ask other people to check your code, or at least the output. And the other one that I find useful quite a lot when I'm stuck on something, just walk away for 5 minutes. The number of times I find a bug that I've been looking at for hours, just walking away, coming back, and then you see it. Stupid me, what have I been doing here?
Well, I think I actually think we're coming up on wrapping up. Don't forget, all these people that are up here, they're going to be here all week. One of the things you can do is just go talk to these people. Most of them are friendly.
I think that
I bite.
Kyle, yeah, I heard
Kyle's
some things about him.
not friendly.
the VMware Code Booth, I'm plugging your company now. The VMware Code Booth is a very interesting place to meet a lot of these people, I suppose.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of community people there who are actually volunteering to actually, be at the booth and be accessible. So that's going to be, people like Josh, hopefully, even though he shakes his head, but he might find that bus with his name on the way there. Who knows?
And on
It's more like a go to the booth.
and on that note, I think we're just going to go ahead and close this one down. Thanks guys for coming. Thank you to all the people on the panel. Appreciate it.